The night air in Maple Creek carried a strange stillness, one of those quiet evenings when even the crickets seemed to hum softer, as if the world had settled into peace. Inside a small, cozy home at the end of Willow Street, a young mother named Claire Matthews tucked her 3-year-old daughter, Ella, into bed. The smell of warm cocoa lingered in the air, and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. "Mommy, can you leave the light on?" Ella whispered, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Claire smiled. "Of course, my love." She bent down, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered, "You're safe, sweetheart?" Safe. That word echoed with cruel irony just an hour later. It began with a faint creak barely noticeable over the hum of the heater. Then another. A shadow moved across the living room window, and a gloved hand pressed against the glass. Claire stirred from her couch, frowning as she thought she'd imagined it. The second sound wasn't so subtle. A sharp crash of breaking glass split the silence. Claire bolted upright, her heart pounding. "Ella!" she gasped, sprinting toward her daughter's room. Before she could reach the hallway, a masked figure stepped into the light. The intruder was tall, broad-shouldered, and trembling, slightly desperate, dangerous. His face was hidden behind a black ski mask. "Don't move," he hissed. Claire froze, her breath caught in her chest. She wasn't thinking of herself, only Ella, sleeping just a few doors away. "Please," she whispered. "Take whatever you want. Just please don't hurt my daughter." The man's eyes darted wildly. "Where's the money?" he barked. "Where is it?" Claire stepped back. "There's cash in my purse. Please, just—" Before she could finish, he lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm. She fought back, scratching and kicking, her adrenaline drowning out the fear. The struggle spilled into the hallway, her voice breaking as she screamed, "Ella! Run, baby, run!" The next few seconds blurred. An elbow, a fall, the sickening thud of her head hitting the wooden floor. Claire's vision dimmed as the intruder scrambled away, the sound of footsteps fading into the night. When silence finally returned, only soft sobs remained. Ella stood in the doorway, tiny and trembling, clutching her rabbit. "Mommy?" There was no answer. The police arrived within minutes, red and blue lights flashing across the quiet neighborhood. Officer Daniels, a seasoned cop in his late 30s, stepped out of his patrol car with his canine partner, Rex, a large, black German shepherd with intelligent eyes. "Report says 1 injured adult, 1 child." The dispatcher's voice echoed through his radio. Daniels entered cautiously, flashlight cutting through the shattered glass. He found Claire unconscious but breathing, her head bleeding slightly. Paramedics rushed in to help her, while Daniels turned toward the hallway, where a small figure stood frozen in the shadows. A little girl, barefoot, silent. "Hey there, sweetheart," Daniels said softly, kneeling. "It's okay. You're safe now." No response. Ella's wide blue eyes stared past him, unblinking. She was shaking violently, unable to speak. Daniels slowly motioned for Rex. "Come here, boy." The dog approached with quiet steps, tail low, ears forward. When Rex reached Ella, he didn't bark or move quickly. Instead, he sat down gently, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air near her. Ella's eyes flickered toward the dog. Her small hands clenched her rabbit tighter. Rex tilted his head, then leaned forward and licked her hand, once soft, reassuring. A sound escaped Ella's lips, a tiny whisper. "Doggy safe." Daniels froze. It was the first word she'd spoken since they arrived. "That's right," he said gently. "Doggy safe? He's here to help." Ella dropped to her knees and wrapped her tiny arms around Rex's neck. The dog stayed perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of that fragile embrace. Daniel's throat tightened. He'd seen hundreds of crime scenes, but nothing like this, nothing so heartbreakingly innocent. Hours later, at the hospital, doctors assured him that Claire would recover. A mild concussion, a few bruises, but she'd be okay. The problem was Ella. The child hadn't spoken another word since whispering to Rex. She refused to look at anyone nurses, doctors, even her grandmother. She only asked one thing. "Where's Doggy?" Officer Daniels brought Rex the next day. As soon as the dog entered the hospital room, Ella's face softened. She reached out from her mother's bedside and said, "Hi, Rex." Daniel smiled. "You remember his name, huh?" Ella nodded. "He makes safe." It was clear Rex had become her anchor in a world that had suddenly turned terrifying. Over the next few days, Daniels and Rex visited daily. They didn't push her to talk about the night. Instead, Daniels let Rex do what he did best, simply be there. Sometimes Ella would sit silently, running her fingers through the dog's fur. Other times, she'd whisper things no adult could hear. One afternoon, as Daniels waited outside the hospital room, he overheard Ella's soft voice. "Rex, bad man's shoes were wet." He made doorbell. "Mommy cry." Daniel's heart skipped. Those weren't random words. They were clues. He quietly took notes, piecing together fragments of what Ella told Rex during their visits. Each session revealed something new, a detail about the man's smell, the sound of his boots, the broken glass near the kitchen door. Rex had become the bridge between fear and truth. Outside, the investigation intensified. Police collected the footprint near the back door and compared it to known offenders in the area. They traced the muddy boot to a parolee named Troy Benson, a man with a history of violent break-ins. But they needed more than footprints. They needed eyewitness testimony. And the only witness was 3 years old. When Daniels met with the district attorney, the room was heavy with doubt. "You're saying she won't talk to anyone but your dog?" asked Prosecutor Linda Shaw, adjusting her glasses skeptically. "That's right," Daniels replied. "But she talks." To him, "Officer, a court won't accept testimony from a toddler's conversation with a dog." Daniels sighed. "Then we'll find another way." Meanwhile, Ella began recovering slowly. She drew pictures of Rex, of her mother, and sometimes of dark scribbles she called "Bad Man." She still refused to talk to anyone except Rex, but her fear was softening. One evening, as Daniels prepared to leave, Ella tugged on his sleeve. "Rex can come to court?" she asked quietly. Daniels blinked in surprise. "Why, sweetheart?" "Bad Man has to see I'm not scared," she whispered, petting Rex's head. "Doggy make me brave." It was such a simple statement, but to Daniels, it felt like destiny unfolding. That night, as he drove home with Rex in the passenger seat, Daniels couldn't shake the image of the tiny girl, with tearful eyes finding courage through a dog's loyalty. Rex leaned his head out the window, the cool night air ruffling his fur. Daniels glanced at him and murmured, "Looks like we've got another job, partner." Rex gave a low, approving bark, as if he understood. Neither of them knew then that the bond between a frightened little girl and a faithful dog would soon move an entire courtroom to tears, and remind the world that sometimes justice doesn't begin with a gavel, it begins with a paw. The days after the attack moved slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. The doctors said Claire would recover physically, but the emotional scars would take far longer to fade. As for Ella, she remained wrapped in a world of silence. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply sat by her mother's hospital bed, holding her stuffed rabbit and staring at the window as if waiting for someone or something to appear. Every time footsteps echoed in the hallway, she flinched. Every time a nurse entered the room, she turned her face away. The only sound that came from her tiny mouth was a faint whisper at night when she dreamed. "Doggy safe?" Officer Daniels visited every morning. He brought coffee for the nurses, updates for the doctors, and most importantly, Rex. The big German shepherd had a calm, steady energy that filled the room like quiet sunlight. The moment he entered, Ella's shoulders relaxed. Rex would sit near her bed, his eyes soft and patient. Sometimes he'd rest his head on her blanket, breathing slowly until she matched his rhythm. Daniels never forced words out of her. He knew silence was a fragile thing. One morning, Daniels arrived later than usual. When he stepped into the room, Ella was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Rex, tracing her fingers along his fur. Claire watched from the bed, weak but smiling. "She hasn't said a word to anyone," Claire whispered, "but she talks to him." Daniels crouched near them. "What's she say?" Claire shook her head. "I can't make out most of it, but it sounds like she's telling him what happened." He watched quietly. Ella's voice was soft, almost a breath. "Bad man come in? Mommy cry. Door boom loud. I hide, but doggy make safe." Daniels swallowed hard. Those weren't just fragments. They were memories, surfacing piece by piece through trust. Rex looked up briefly, as if understanding his role, then lay back down. Daniels recorded a few notes later that day. He wasn't sure if this information could ever be used legally, but it was clear Ella's trauma had found its first bridge, and that bridge had 4 legs and a wagging tail. By the end of the week, Ella was allowed to go home, but she refused to enter her own house. The moment she saw the broken window now repaired, she clung to her mother and cried for the first time since the night of the attack. "I don't want Bad Nan come again," she sobbed. Daniels, standing nearby, gently said, "He won't. Rex will come visit you, okay?" Her tears slowed. "Doggy come here?" He nodded. "Every day, if you want." From that moment, Rex became a daily guest at the Matthews home. He would sit beside Ella while she played with blocks or colored in her sketchbook. Sometimes she'd place her tiny toy figures next to him, pretending they were guarding him from bad guys. "Rex, you police dog," she'd say seriously. "You catch bad man." Daniels smiled every time he heard that. It wasn't just play, it was therapy, the kind that no professional could replicate. One afternoon, while Daniels and Claire spoke in the kitchen, Ella's laughter echoed from the living room, a sound neither of them had heard in weeks. They peeked in to find Ella hugging Rex, giggling as the dog gently pawed at her stuffed rabbit. Claire covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought I'd never hear her laugh again," she whispered. Daniel smiled softly. He's got away with people. But beneath that smile, Daniels was thinking. The investigation was progressing, but slowly. They had a suspect, Troy Benson, but the evidence wasn't solid enough. The case would soon need eyewitness confirmation, and the only person who truly saw the intruder was the child sitting on the rug, laughing with a dog. He couldn't imagine putting her in a courtroom. She was barely 3. But somehow, she was the key to everything. The next morning, Daniels brought a small notepad. He didn't plan to question Ella directly, just observe. "Hey, Ella," he said casually, sitting on the couch. "Mind if Rex sits with you while you color?" She nodded eagerly. As she colored, she began to talk not to Daniels, but to Rex. "You saw a bad man, right? He have big boots. He broke Mommy's things. He scared me." Daniel's heart skipped. "Boots," he murmured under his breath. That matched the muddy print they'd found. Then Ella frowned, pressing her crayon hard on the paper. "Bad man smell like smoke," she said, "like Daddy's old fire smell." Daniels jotted it down. Smoke. The suspect's apartment had been found with cigarette butts matching that description. The fragments were forming a picture, one soft word at a time. After a few minutes, Ella looked up. "Doggy, I talk good?" Rex wagged his tail. Daniels grinned. "You talk perfect, kiddo." Over the following weeks, the relationship deepened. The local news began whispering about the little girl who only spoke to a police dog. Reporters wanted interviews, but Daniels shielded her from the attention. She didn't need cameras, she needed calm. Still, something about the story touched everyone who heard it. Other officers began visiting to watch Rex and Ella interact. Hardened men who'd seen years of crime would leave the Matthews house with red eyes, wiping away tears they couldn't explain. One evening, Daniels returned to find Claire sitting on the porch, worry etched on her face. "She's having nightmares again," she said quietly. But when Rex sleeps near her bed, they stop. Daniels looked down at Rex. "You really are her guardian, huh, boy?" The dog thumped his tail against the wooden porch. Weeks passed. Slowly, Ella began drawing scenes from that night, tiny stick figures. A house, a door, and dark scribbles representing the bad man. Each time she finished, she'd show them to Rex first, waiting for his reaction before showing her mother. One afternoon, she drew a tall figure with a blue hat and proudly told Rex, "That's you." Daniels chuckled. "Blue hat, huh?" She nodded. "Police hat. You and Rex catch bad man." Her eyes shone with something new hope. For the first time since the attack, Claire saw her daughter smile without fear. That's when she realized this wasn't just recovery, it was rebirth. One night, as rain pattered softly against the windows, Claire woke to faint murmuring. She tiptoed to Ella's room and saw her daughter sitting upright, whispering into Rex's ear. "Doggy, I'm not scared no more," she said. "Mommy's safe." "You make safe." Claire's chest tightened. Tears filled her eyes as she quietly backed away. For months, she had prayed for words like that. The next morning, Daniels received a call from Prosecutor Linda Shaw. "We've got the suspect in custody," she said. "He matches the footprint and description. But we need testimony, Daniels. Without it, the defense will tear us apart." Daniels hesitated. "She's just a kid, Linda. She's been through enough." "I know. But if she could just speak, just confirm what she saw, it could close this case." He glanced at Rex, resting by the door, and then at the drawing Ella had given him earlier that morning. A stick figure holding hands with a big dog. "She might not talk to you," Daniels said finally, "but maybe she'll talk to him." That night, as Daniels sat in his car outside the Matthews house, he looked at Rex. "You've done the impossible, partner," he said softly. "Now let's see if you can do it one more time." The dog lifted his head, eyes alert, sensing something important was about to happen. Inside the house, little Ella was already waiting by the window, her rabbit in one hand, her smile shy but real. When Rex stepped out of the car, she ran to him, her laughter ringing through the cool evening air, sound bright enough to heal even the darkest night. And though neither of them knew it yet, that laughter would soon echo inside a courtroom, changing not only a case but countless hearts around the world. Spring arrived in Maple Creek with blooming cherry trees and an air of cautious hope. The Matthews home, once marked by police tape and broken glass, now smelled of fresh paint and lavender candles. Claire was healing physically, at least, but the shadows still lingered in her eyes. Officer Daniels visited often, always with Rex by his side. Ella had grown more talkative now, but only with the dog. She told him everything, what she ate, what she dreamed, and sometimes bits of that awful night she still couldn't fully understand. One morning, Daniels arrived to find Claire on the porch, holding a letter with trembling hands. "It's from the prosecutor's office," she said quietly. "They've set a trial date." Daniels felt the weight of those words settle over them like fog. The man accused Troy Benson, a 42-year-old drifter with a record of burglary and assault, had finally been indicted. The evidence pointed toward him, but it wasn't strong enough to guarantee a conviction. The stolen items had been sold, the prints were partial, and the only eyewitness was a child barely old enough to form sentences. "We'll need her to testify," Claire said, almost in a whisper. "But how?" Danielle sighed. That's what we'll have to figure out. The next day, Daniels met with prosecutor Linda Shaw, a sharp, compassionate woman in her 40s, known for her unconventional strategies. Her office was cluttered with papers, photos, and coffee mugs. When Daniels entered, she was pacing the floor. "Officer Daniels," she greeted, gesturing for him to sit. "I've been reviewing the case file. Your report says the child Ella communicates through your K9? Daniels nodded. Yes, she trusts Rex. She talks to him like he's her best friend. Linda raised an eyebrow. But not to you? Not directly, Daniels admitted. If I ask her questions, she frees. But if Rex is there, she answers him. Sometimes in detail. Sometimes in fragments. It's incredible. Linda leaned back, tapping her pen thoughtfully. We can't put a dog on the witness stand. I know, Danielle said, managing a small smile. But maybe we can put them both. Linda frowned. You're suggesting she testifies with the dog present? Yes, if Rex is there, she might be calm enough to speak. Without him, she's shut down completely. I've seen it. Linda considered this for a long moment, her gaze distant. There's no legal precedent for that in our district, she said. The defense will object. They'll say the dog's presence is emotional manipulation. Daniels leaned forward. Maybe, but this little girl saw her mother attacked. She's the only person who knows exactly what happened. You take Rex away from her, you take away her voice. The room fell silent. Outside the window, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Finally, Linda sighed. All right. I'll file a motion to allow a support animal for the witness. But you need to prepare that child. She'd be facing strangers, lawyers, cameras. It'll be overwhelming. Daniels nodded. I'll handle it. And Rex will too. Over the next few weeks, Daniels and Rex worked with Ella gently, turning their visits into small practice sessions. They sat in a room similar to a courtroom setup, complete with chairs, a fake microphone, and even a wooden desk borrowed from a nearby school. Okay, sweetheart, Danielle said one afternoon. If someone asks you what happened that night, what do you do? Ella sat cross-legged beside Rex, rubbing his ear. I tell Doggy. That's right, Daniels encouraged. You can tell Rex anything you want. He'll help you. The more they practiced, the braver she became. Sometimes she'd stand on her little toes and pretend to testify to our stuffed animals. Other times, she'd whisper to Rex while Daniels quietly recorded clues she offered. Each day, she grew stronger. But Daniels couldn't shake the knot in his stomach. No amount of rehearsal could prepare a 3-year-old for the intimidating reality of a courtroom. The motion to allow Rex in court was met with fierce resistance. During the pre-trial hearing, the defense attorney Mark Leland, a cold, calculating man, scoffed openly. This is absurd, he said to the judge. The prosecution is parading a child and a dog in front of the jury to elicit sympathy. That's not justice, it's theater. Linda stood calmly. Your Honor, this child is the victim's daughter. She witnessed the crime. She's 3 years old and severely traumatized. The dog isn't a prop. He's her emotional anchor. Without him, she won't be able to speak at all. Judge Marilyn Cooper, a stern woman with gray hair pulled into a bun, leaned forward. Officer Daniels, this is your K9? Yes, ma'am, he replied. Rex has been specially trained to provide comfort in sensitive cases. I've witnessed firsthand how his presence allows the child to communicate. The judge studied the reports for a long moment. Then she looked up. This court recognizes the psychological needs of minor witnesses. The request is granted. The child may testify accompanied by the K9. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Linda smiled faintly at Daniels. The defense attorney scowled. The battle had only begun, but they just won the first round. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with anticipation. Local news outlets picked up the story. Toddler to testify with police dog in emotional trial. Some called it inspiring. Others called it a publicity stunt. But inside the Matthews home, none of that mattered. Claire was terrified her daughter would be overwhelmed. Ella, however, seemed calm. "Doggy come too?" she asked one night as Claire tucked her in. "Yes, baby," Claire said softly. "Rex will be there." Ella smiled, her thumb in her mouth. "Then I brave." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sweetheart, you're brave." The morning of the trial dawned bright and cold. Daniels woke before sunrise, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. He brushed Rex's coat, adjusted his collar, and whispered, "Let's make her proud, boy." When they arrived at the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters called out questions, but Daniels shielded Ella as they walked inside. She wore a yellow dress and clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly. Rex walked beside her, his steps measured, his eyes scanning every corner like the professional he was. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The jury had already been seated. Benson sat at the defense table, his eyes shifting nervously. When Ella saw him, she froze. Daniels knelt beside her. "It's okay, sweetheart. Look at Rex." Her eyes shifted to the dog, who stared back at her with steady calm. She placed her hand on his back. "Doggy safe." Daniels nodded. "That's right. Doggy safe." They walked together to the witness stand. Before the testimony began, Judge Cooper addressed the room. "Let the record show that the child witness will testify with the assistance of a certified police K-9 for emotional support." Some spectators whispered, but the moment Ella sat down, the room fell silent. She looked so small behind the wooden barrier, her legs dangling, her tiny hands clutching the rabbit. Rex lay at her feet, calm and alert. Daniels stood nearby, his heart pounding. Linda Shaw smiled reassuringly. "Good morning, Ella," she began gently. "My name is Linda. Do you know why you're here today?" Ella didn't answer. She looked at the judge, the jury, then down at Rex. Her bottom lip quivered. Linda glanced at Daniels. He nodded. "You can talk to Rex, sweetheart," Linda said softly. "Just tell him." Ella leaned forward, whispering into the dog's ear. The microphone caught only faint words too soft for the audience to understand. But as Daniels watched, he could see it happening again, a transformation. Her body relaxed. Her voice steadied. The fear melted away, replaced by something else, something pure. Courage. The courtroom held its breath. And though no one yet knew what she would say, every heart in that room sensed it. This child, with her tiny voice and her loyal dog, was about to do what no one believed possible. She was going to speak the truth. The courtroom was so silent, you could hear the faint ticking of the clock above the judge's bench. Every eye was fixed on the little girl sitting behind the witness stand. A tiny figure dressed in yellow, her hair tied in soft pigtails, her hand resting gently on the back of the police dog lying at her feet. The air was thick with emotion, tension, and disbelief. Reporters, officers, and townspeople filled the benches. Even the defendant, Troy Benson, couldn't hide his unease as he looked toward the witness stand, toward the child who held the truth he thought would stay buried forever. Judge Cooper's voice broke the silence. "You may proceed, Miss Shaw." Prosecutor Linda Shaw stepped forward, careful not to startle the child. Her tone was warm, gentle, nothing like the stern, commanding voice she usually carried in court. "Good morning, Ella," she said softly, offering a small smile. "You look very pretty today." Ella didn't answer. She glanced briefly at Linda, then looked down at Rex. Her tiny fingers clutched his fur. That's Rex, right? Linda continued, her voice light. He's your friend? Ella nodded once. And he's here to help you? Another nod, firmer this time. Okay, Linda said. We're all just here to listen to you. No one's going to hurt you, sweetheart. You're safe. Ella's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She looked at Rex, whispered something into his ear, and then looked up, not at the prosecutor, not at the judge, but at the ceiling, as if searching for courage in the air around her. Daniels watched from the side of the courtroom, his hands clasped tight behind his back. He had seen bravery before, in soldiers, in officers, in victims who rebuilt their lives. But nothing compared to this. She's just 3 years old, he thought. 3. And yet here she is, standing in front of the man who broke into her home. He noticed her breathing steady as she stroked Rex's ear. It was as if the dog's presence created a protective bubble around her, a shield no fear could penetrate. Linda approached gently. Ella, do you remember what happened the night you met Officer Daniels? Ella tilted her head, thinking. Then, softly, she said, there was glass. Mommy cried. The words were faint but clear enough for the courtroom microphone. A collective breath swept through the audience. Even the defense attorney looked momentarily startled. He hadn't expected her to speak at all. Linda nodded slowly. That's right, sweetheart. There was glass. And Mommy cried. Can you tell Rex what happened before that? Ella turned to Rex and whispered. The dog's tail twitched slightly, and she continued in a louder voice, almost as if Rex had given her permission. There was loud noise. Like bang. Was that outside or inside? Linda asked. Inside. And then what happened? Ella's eyes clouded. She hugged her stuffed bunny tighter. Man come. He push Mommy. She fall. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Claire, sitting in the front row, covered her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. Daniels closed his eyes for a brief moment, fighting back emotion. You're doing great, Ella, Linda whispered. You're being so brave. Can you tell Rex what the man looked like? Ella leaned down, pressing her cheek against the dog's head. He had hat, black, and he smelled bad. Smell bad? Linda repeated gently. Ella nodded. Like smoke. Linda paused, exchanging a knowing glance with the detective in the gallery. The suspect was known for chain-smoking cheap cigarettes, a detail that hadn't been made public. And then what did the man do, sweetheart? Ella hesitated. Her small chest rose and fell quickly. He hurt Mommy. He say bad words. Her voice began to shake. Then Mommy screamed. Linda took a small step back, lowering her voice to a whisper. It's okay, baby. You don't have to tell us everything if it's too scary. But if you can, tell Rex what happened after Mommy screamed. Ella's eyes brimmed with tears. She bent forward and whispered into Rex's ear again. This time, her words were clear enough for the microphone to pick up. Doggy, I hide under table. I see man take shiny thing. He drop it. Mommy cry. Then you come. Linda blinked, stunned. He dropped something? Ella nodded. Shiny thing. Daniel's head snapped up. That detail wasn't in any report. Officers had searched the house multiple times, but found nothing resembling a shiny thing. Linda leaned closer. Do you know where the man dropped it, Ella? The little girl thought hard, then pointed at the air like she was tracing a memory. Near the big chair. The brown one. Next to Mommy's tea. Daniel's pulse quickened. That corner of the living room had been overlooked during the search, sealed off because of broken glass and blood. He looked toward the prosecutor, who caught his gaze. Both knew what this meant. The child's words could lead to physical evidence, something that could solidify the case. The defense attorney, Mark Leland, stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is highly suggestive. The child's statements are unreliable," and Judge Cooper raised a hand. "Overruled. The witness is recounting her own memory." Leland scowled and sat down. The jury's eyes were fixed on Ella. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Others looked deeply moved. Linda turned back to the child. "You're doing such a good job, sweetheart. Just one more question, okay?" Ella nodded timidly. "When the man hurt your mommy, did you see his face?" The question hung in the air. Ella froze for a moment, her small body trembling. Rex raised his head and rested his chin on her lap, sensing her distress. Ella took a deep breath, and then slowly she nodded. "Yes. Can you tell Rex what his face looked like?" She leaned down again, whispering softly. The courtroom was so silent, everyone could hear the faintest word. "He had bad eyes," she said. "Scary eyes. Like he no sleep." Linda's tone remained calm. "And if you saw him again, do you think you'd remember him?" Ella nodded once more. Then she pointed, her small hand shaking, pointing directly at Troy Benson. "That man." The room erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled frantically. Jurors shifted in their seats, their faces pale with emotion. Benson's attorney jumped to his feet. "Objection. The witness is being manipulated." Judge Cooper banged her gavel. "Order. Sit down, Mr. Leland." But the damage was done. The jury had seen it. The raw innocence, the trembling courage, and the unmistakable certainty in that child's voice. Linda stepped closer to the bench. "Thank you, Ella," she said softly. "You've helped us a lot today. You were so brave." Ella turned to Rex. "Doggy, we did good?" Rex wagged his tail slowly, as if understanding. The judge's expression softened. "Yes, young lady," she said from the bench. "You did very good." And as Ella climbed down from the witness stand, holding Rex's leash, something extraordinary happened. The courtroom, filled with hardened lawyers, detectives, and reporters, began to applaud softly. It wasn't official. It wasn't proper courtroom decorum, but no one stopped it. Daniels knelt beside her as she walked toward her mother. "You did it, champ," he whispered. Ella smiled, her eyes shining through tears. "Doggy, make me brave." Claire swept her daughter into her arms, sobbing quietly into her shoulder. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "Doggy made you brave, but so did you." Outside the courthouse, the world seemed to pause. Cameras clicked, but the story wasn't about sensational headlines anymore. It was about courage, a child's pure heart, a mother's love, and a dog's silent strength. That day, no one left the courtroom the same. Even the judge, who had presided over hundreds of cases, wiped a tear from her cheek before announcing a recess. Inside, Rex lay at Daniel's feet, his head resting on his paws. He didn't understand laws, verdicts, or justice, but he knew one thing. He had done his duty. And somewhere deep down, everyone knew justice had found its voice, in the gentle whisper of a 3-year-old girl and the faithful eyes of a police dog. When the courtroom emptied that afternoon, the air still seemed to hum with what had just happened. People didn't talk loudly. They whispered, as if afraid that raising their voices might break the fragile spell left behind by the little girl in yellow. Reporters huddled in corners, typing fast, trying to capture the emotion that no words could truly describe. Toddler points out attacker in court. One headline already read, "Police dog helps child find her voice," said another. But for Officer Daniels and Prosecutor Linda Shaw, the moment wasn't over. It was only the beginning. As soon as the court recessed, Linda pulled Daniels aside. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with purpose. "Did you hear what she said?" she asked, voice low. "The shiny thing?" Yes, Daniels nodded. If she's right, there's something in that living room we missed. Linda exhaled sharply. Then we find it tonight. By sunset, Daniels and his partner, Officer Ruiz, were back at the Matthews house. The once chaotic crime scene was now quiet, the furniture rearranged, the floor repaired, the scent of lavender still in the air. Claire met them at the door, her arms crossed nervously. "What's happening?" she asked. "Is something wrong?" Daniels shook his head. "Not wrong. Ella mentioned something important in her testimony. We just need to take another look around. Do you mind?" "Of course not," she said immediately, stepping aside. "Anything that helps." Rex padded inside first, nose twitching. The old instincts returned, the steady, sweeping pattern of a police search dog, trained to notice what humans couldn't. They began near the spot Ella had described, the corner by the brown armchair, next to the tea table. The sunlight from the window spilled over the carpet, casting warm golden rays across the room. Ruiz crouched down, scanning carefully. "You really think a 3-year-old remembers details this small?" Daniels smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what a child can remember, especially one who doesn't forget pain." For nearly 20 minutes, they found nothing, only dust, a few forgotten toy blocks, and a faint stain on the carpet. Claire watched silently from the hallway, her hands gripping the edge of the wall. Then Rex stopped. His ears perked, his nose pressed against the wooden floorboard beside the armchair. He sniffed, pawed gently, then looked up at Daniels expectantly. Daniels crouched. "Good boy." "What is it?" He brushed his hand over the area. The wood felt uneven. A faint metallic glint caught his eye in the crack between boards. "Flashlight," he said. Ruiz handed him one instantly. The beam revealed a small gap, and inside it, something silver reflecting light. Daniels pried the board carefully with his pocket tool until it loosened with a creak. He reached in, and when his fingers closed around something cold and thin, he froze. It was a necklace, delicate, silver, with a small oval pendant. But what mattered wasn't the jewelry. It was what was tangled around it. A few strands of hair, and a tiny smear of dried blood. Claire gasped softly from behind him. "That's mine," she whispered. "It's my mother's necklace. I wore it that night." Daniels turned the pendant over in his hand. The clasp was broken, snapped. He met Ruiz's gaze. "Agate. Get forensics on it tonight." Ruiz nodded. "Think it's got prints?" Daniel's eyes hardened. "If we're lucky, maybe enough to end this." That night, at the precinct lab, tension filled the air. Technicians in white gloves worked under bright lights, carefully dusting the pendant and photographing every angle. The forensic specialist, Dr. Morgan, was meticulous, silent except for the sound of latex snapping in camera clicks. Hours passed. Daniels stayed, leaning against the wall, coffee untouched. Finally, near midnight, Dr. Morgan turned to him. "We've got something." Daniels straightened. "What? A partial print?" "It's smeared, but the ridge pattern matches with one of our existing profiles." "Who?" Morgan typed quickly on her monitor. The system beeped, searching through databases. Seconds felt like hours. Then, match found. The name appeared on screen. Troy Benson. Daniels stared at it, exhaling a shaky breath. "That's it," he said softly. "That's the link we needed." Morgan nodded. "The print matches the right index finger with 92% certainty. Add that to the child's testimony, and you've got a solid case." By morning, Linda Shaw had the new evidence in her possession. When she entered the courthouse, her stride carried the energy of victory. Quiet, righteous, unstoppable. The defense team hadn't seen it coming. They still believed Ella's testimony could be dismissed as emotional influence, until Linda dropped a sealed evidence bag onto the table. "The victim's necklace," she said calmly. "Recovered from the crime scene last night, based on the child's own recollection. Fingerprint confirmed. Your client's." Mark Leland's face drained of color. "That's impossible. That area was already processed?" "Yes," Linda interrupted smoothly. "And missed. But the witness led us to it. Her memory was precise." The defense attorney opened his mouth, but no words came. Judge Cooper leaned forward. "Ms. Shaw, are you entering this into evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Linda said, holding up the document. Exhibit C, recovered necklace linking the defendant to the scene. The courtroom murmured again, louder this time. Daniels watched from his usual corner, pride swelling in his chest. Ella's testimony hadn't just touched hearts, it had uncovered truth. When Claire learned about the discovery later that day, she broke down in relief. "I can't believe she remembered that," she whispered. "She was hiding under the table, and she still noticed." Daniels smiled gently. "Kids remember the things that matter. Sometimes the details we think are small, to them, they're everything." Claire reached down and stroked Rex's head. "I don't know how I'll ever thank you." Daniels shook his head. "Thank her. She was the one who didn't give up." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse and the sky turned a deep orange, Daniels took Rex for a walk around the square. The dog trotted happily, ears flicking with every sound. "You did good, partner," Daniels said quietly. "You gave her courage." Rex glanced up with his steady brown eyes, the same eyes that had guided a terrified child through her darkest hour. They stopped near a fountain, where the water sparkled in the fading light. Children played nearby, laughter echoing through the air. Daniels watched them, realizing how easily innocence could be lost, and how miraculous it was when it could be found again. Inside the courthouse, Linda worked late, preparing her final arguments. The evidence was strong, but she knew the defense wouldn't go down without a fight. They would argue technicalities, chain of custody, anything they could. Still, she couldn't help but smile as she flipped through her notes. Every piece of evidence told a story, but the most powerful testimony hadn't come from science or adults or experts. It had come from a 3-year-old child who whispered her truth to a dog. And that truth had moved mountains. When Daniels returned to his office, a small envelope was waiting on his desk. Inside was a drawing, made with crayons on plain paper. It showed a little girl in a yellow dress, standing next to a big brown dog. Above them, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Doggy safe. Officer nice." Daniels chuckled softly, his throat tightening. He pinned it to the bulletin board beside his desk, right next to the commendation letters and case files. Because sometimes, he thought, justice doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts with someone brave enough to speak, even if they're only 3 years old. That night, the small town of Maple Creek slept peacefully for the first time in months. And somewhere in her little pink bedroom, Ella dreamed, not of glass or fear, but of sunshine, laughter, and Rex's gentle heartbeat beside her. For the first time since the night of the break-in, her dreams were quiet. The second phase of the trial began on a bright Monday morning, but the atmosphere inside the courthouse was anything but light. The crowd that had once gathered out of curiosity now came with something different: reverence. They had witnessed a miracle in that room, and now they wanted to see justice finish what courage had begun. Officer Daniels stood outside the courtroom with Rex, his hand on the dog's collar, watching reporters swarm near the entrance. Cameras flashed, microphones hovered, and questions poured in like rain. "Officer Daniels, is it true the child led you to new evidence? Will the dog be back in court today? Do you believe the testimony of a toddler can convict a man?" Daniels didn't answer any of them. He only said softly, "We're here for the truth." Then he led Rex inside. When the trial resumed, the courtroom was packed. Every seat taken, every wall lined with spectators. Even Judge Cooper seemed more solemn than usual, her gavel tapping just once before the proceedings began. Linda Shaw stood ready, a file tucked under her arm, her confidence calm but fierce. Across from her, Mark Leland sat with his client, Troy Benson, the man whose smirk had all but vanished since the new evidence had surfaced. "Your Honor," Leland began, his tone dripping with condescension. "Before we proceed, the defense moves to strike the necklace evidence from record. The item was discovered after the original crime scene investigation was closed, clearly a violation of proper chain of custody protocol." Linda didn't even flinch. "Your Honor, the evidence was found precisely where the victim's child, our witness, indicated it would be. That alone verifies her credibility. The chain of custody is intact and properly logged by 2 certified officers. The defense is attempting to suppress valid proof because it condemns their client." Judge Cooper looked over her glasses. "Mr. Leland, the chain of custody documentation has been reviewed and verified." Motion denied. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. Leland's jaw tightened. "Then, Your Honor, the defense requests permission to cross-examine Officer Daniels regarding the alleged recovery of said evidence." "Permission granted," the judge replied. Daniels took the stand, his uniform crisp, his posture steady. Rex sat quietly beside the witness box, his head resting on his paws, calm but alert, a living symbol of loyalty and truth. Leland approached with calculated steps, his tone deceptively polite. "Officer Daniels, you're the one who recovered the necklace, correct?" "Yes, sir." "And you did this at the prompting of a 3-year-old child?" "Yes." "So, essentially, your entire line of police work was guided by the unverified statements of a toddler?" Daniels didn't blink. "I was guided by a child who witnessed a crime, and who turned out to be right." A few quiet chuckles escaped from the spectators, but Judge Cooper quickly raised her gavel. "Order." Leland pressed on. "Is it not true that a police investigation had already cleared that section of the house? Meaning, whatever you found could have been planted later." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. No one had access to the scene after the official lockdown. The area was sealed by police tape and under evidence control. The item was there from the beginning. We just didn't see it. Leland's smile faltered. "And you're certain the fingerprint on the necklace matches my client's?" "I'm not the forensic examiner, but yes, the lab confirmed it matched Benson's right index finger." Leland turned to the jury dramatically. "So, we're basing this man's fate on the word of a frightened child and the intuition of a dog handler. Ladies and gentlemen, does that sound like proof beyond reasonable doubt to you?" Linda stood instantly. "Objection. Argument, not question." "Sustained," said the judge. Leland's expression soured. He stepped back, waving his hand dismissively. No further questions. As Daniels left the stand, his gaze flicked briefly to Benson. The man avoided his eyes, fidgeting in his chair. Guilt was written across every nervous movement. Next, Linda called Dr. Morgan, the forensic analyst. Her calm, clinical testimony laid out the science in irrefutable terms. The fingerprint on the pendant was Benson's. The hair caught in the chain matched Claire Matthews. The blood, though faint, was type O negative, Claire's blood type. Leland tried to poke holes in the testimony, but each attempt fell flat. Every question he asked only made the evidence sound stronger. By midday, the jury's expressions had shifted. Doubt was fading, replaced by something close to outrage. That afternoon, during a short recess, Daniels found Claire and Ella waiting in a quiet hallway. Ella wore a little blue dress this time, and Rex sat beside her, tail thumping softly. Claire smiled through tired eyes. She keeps asking if the bad man will go away forever. Daniels knelt beside the child. Soon, he said softly. You helped everyone see what really happened. You are brave, and brave people make the world safe. Ella looked at Rex and giggled. Doggy say he wants snack. Daniels laughed. I bet he does. He pulled a small biscuit from his pocket, a secret stash he always kept for Rex, and handed it to her. She fed it to the dog, who wagged happily. The sight, simple and pure, was a brief breath of peace in a storm of law and grief. When the court reconvened, the defense shifted tactics. Leland, cornered by facts, turned to desperation. He called Benson himself to the stand. The courtroom tensed. Daniel's hands instinctively tightened on Rex's leash. Claire held her daughter close. Benson, tall but trembling, swore the oath and sat down. His eyes darted between the jury and the floor, never once meeting Linda's. Mr. Benson, Leland began. Did you enter the Matthews residence on the night in question? No, Benson said quickly. I wasn't even near there. Did you steal anything from the home? No, sir. Did you assault anyone? No. Leland spread his hands. Then how do you explain your fingerprint on the necklace? Benson hesitated. I don't know. Maybe it was planted. Maybe the police made a mistake. Linda rose immediately. Permission to cross, Your Honor? Granted. She walked toward the witness stand, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut through every lie. Mr. Benson, she began, you say you weren't there that night, but you were seen near Maple Creek Road by a witness at 8:45 p.m., less than half a mile from the Matthews house. You also pawned a gold bracelet matching one stolen from that same house the next morning. Do you deny this? Benson's mouth opened, then closed. Sweat formed at his temple. I don't remember that. Of course you don't, Linda said, her tone icy. Because remembering would mean admitting you attacked a woman and traumatized a child. Leland objected. Speculative. Withdrawn, Linda said coolly, eyes still locked on Benson. Let's focus on facts then. The fingerprint, your fingerprint, found on the victim's necklace. Can you explain that, Mr. Benson? Benson swallowed hard. I told you, maybe the police planted it. Officer Daniels is one of the most decorated canine handlers in the state, Linda replied sharply. And you expect this jury to believe he risked his entire career to frame you, based on a child's story? Benson said nothing. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier by the second. Linda leaned closer, voice low and steady. That child, the one you left screaming beside her unconscious mother, remembered you. She remembered your eyes. She remembered your smell. And when she pointed at you, the world saw truth for the first time. Now, I'll ask one last time. Do you still deny you were there? Benson's breathing quickened. His lips trembled. Then, like a balloon popping, he snapped. Fine, I was there. But I didn't mean to hurt her. The courtroom gasped. Cameras clicked. Jurors froze. Linda stepped back slowly. You just confessed, Mr. Benson. Benson's lawyer tried to recover. My client misspoke. But the damage was irreversible. The truth, once buried under denial and lies, had finally burst into daylight. Judge Cooper's gavel thundered. Order, order in the court. Benson slumped back in his chair, face pale, eyes wild. For the first time, he seemed to realize that the cage he'd built for others had finally closed around him. As court adjourned that day, Daniels exhaled deeply. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. The confession, the child's courage, the dog who helped uncover the truth. Rex walked beside him, tail wagging, completely unaware of how many hearts he'd changed. Daniels looked up at the courthouse dome glowing in the afternoon sun. "We did it, partner," he murmured. She did it. And somewhere, not far away, in a small house filled with love and healing, a little girl in blue hugged her stuffed bunny and whispered to her mother, "Doggy make bad man go away." Claire kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby. Doggy helped, but you were the one who made it happen." That night, justice didn't just belong to the courtroom. It belonged to everyone who had believed. Even for a second, that truth could come from the smallest voice. And as Rex dozed off beside Daniel's desk, the old officer smiled softly. Sometimes, he thought, heroes don't wear badges. Sometimes they wear fur. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the courtroom windows as the world waited for the verdict. The air was thick with anticipation, reporters whispering in corners, pens ready, cameras poised. But amid all that tension, there was a calm in the center of it all, the kind that comes when truth is already spoken. Officer Daniels sat near the front row, his cap resting on his knee, Rex curled faithfully at his feet. Across the aisle, Claire held Ella close, her daughter's small hand tucked in hers. The child seemed almost unaware of the gravity of the day. She was humming softly, her wide eyes fixed on the dog she loved. Judge Cooper entered, her robe swaying, her expression firm. Everyone rose. "Please be seated," she said. The jury filed in one by one, solemn and deliberate. Their faces revealed little, but Daniels had been in enough courtrooms to know this was the look of resolution. When the foreman stood, the silence was absolute. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant, Troy Benson, guilty. On the charge of burglary, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. The words echoed through the room like a bell tolling in the distance, final, steady, powerful. Claire let out a trembling breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ella, startled by the collective exhale of the courtroom, whispered, "Mommy, is it over?" Claire smiled through tears. "Yes, baby, it's over." From across the aisle, Benson sat motionless, his hands clenched. The bravado he had worn like armor was gone. His lawyer said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Judge Cooper spoke with the gravity of 1,000 judgments. "Mr. Benson, this court sentences you to 30 years in state prison. May this serve as a reminder that justice may be delayed, but it is never denied." Her gavel struck once. It was done. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with people. Reporters surrounded Claire, but Officer Daniels stepped in, shielding her from the worst of the crowd. "She's not giving statements," he said firmly. "She's going home." Claire nodded in gratitude. "Thank you, officer, for everything." Daniels smiled gently. "You don't owe me thanks. You and your daughter did what even grown men couldn't. You faced fear and told the truth." Ella reached out a tiny hand toward him. "Doggy come see me again?" Daniels chuckled, crouching down. "I think he'd like that very much." Rex wagged his tail, tongue out, as if agreeing. A wave of applause broke out from the crowd, spontaneous and heartfelt. Not for the police, not for the lawyers, but for the little girl who had spoken, and the dog who had listened. The weeks that followed were a blur of healing. Claire and Ella moved back into their small suburban home, but it didn't feel haunted anymore. The air was lighter, the shadows thinner. The therapy sessions continued, gentle, play-based exercises that helped Ella understand her emotions without fear. Sometimes Officer Daniels and Rex would visit, bringing small gifts from the station, a plush police hat, a coloring book with dogs, or just their presence. One afternoon, as the sun spilled across the living room carpet, Ella ran circles around Rex, giggling uncontrollably. The German shepherd sat patiently, his ears twitching with every squeal. "She laughs again now," Claire said softly, standing beside Daniels at the doorway. That's the best kind of justice, Daniels replied. Claire smiled. You really believe that, don't you? He nodded. Every time I see someone like her find their smile again, it reminds me why we wear the badge. Claire looked at him thoughtfully. And what about you? Do you ever get tired of carrying other people's pain? Daniel sighed. It's heavy sometimes. But then I see days like this, and it feels lighter. There was a pause, warm, reflective. Outside, the wind carried the sound of children playing down the street. 2 months later, a small ceremony was held at the precinct. The chief stood at the front podium, addressing officers, reporters, and community members. Today, we honor exceptional bravery, not just from our own ranks, but from a child whose heart reminded us what truth looks like. He gestured to the front row, where Claire and Ella sat beside Daniels and Rex. Ella wore a tiny blue dress again, the same shade as that courtroom day. This department hereby awards a certificate of courage to Miss Ella Matthews, the chief continued, for her bravery, honesty, and spirit in helping bring justice to light. Applause filled the hall. Daniels watched as Ella shyly walked up to accept the framed certificate, holding Rex's leash with her other hand. Cameras flashed, but the moment felt sacred. A child, a mother, a dog, and the truth that bound them all together. When she returned to her seat, she whispered to her mom, "Doggie's famous now?" Claire laughed softly. "You both are." Later, as the event wound down, Daniel sat with Claire on a bench outside the precinct. The evening light bathed the city in gold. "Are you going to keep working with Rex?" Claire asked. "As long as he'll let me," Daniel smiled, scratching the dog's head. "He's getting older, though. Might retire soon." Ella, perched on the bench beside them, frowned. "Retire means stop?" Daniels nodded. "Means rest. Like a long nap." She thought for a moment, then hugged Rex tightly. "Then he can nap at our house." Daniels chuckled. "I'll keep that in mind." For a while, no one spoke. They just watched the city breathe. Cars passing, kids laughing, the soft rhythm of life continuing. Months passed. Seasons changed. The leaves turned gold, then fell, then bloomed again. Life, as it always does, found its rhythm. Claire started volunteering at a victim support center, helping other parents navigate trauma. Ella began preschool, her laughter filling every corner she entered. And Officer Daniels, now nearing retirement, kept his visits to the Matthews home regular. Rex, too, had changed. He was slower now, more content to nap by Ella's feet than chase scents in the wind. But every time he heard her laughter, his tail thumped against the floor, a reminder that some bonds don't weaken. They deepen. One winter morning, Daniels received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a crayon drawing, Ella, Claire, and Rex standing under a rainbow. In the corner, written in uneven letters, "Thank you for making the bad dreams go away." He stared at the drawing for a long moment, his throat tight. Then he smiled, a deep, quiet kind of smile that only comes from knowing your work has truly mattered. That spring, Rex officially retired. The department held a small farewell ceremony. Officers lined the hallway as Daniels removed Rex's badge from his collar. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking slightly. "You've done more for this city, and for one little girl, than any of us ever could." After the ceremony, Daniels drove straight to the Matthews home. When Ella opened the door, her eyes went wide. "Doggy!" She squealed, wrapping her arms around Rex. Daniels smiled. "He's all yours now." Claire gasped softly. "You mean it?" He nodded. "He deserves a family. And I can't think of a better one." Tears welled in Claire's eyes as she hugged him. "Thank you. For everything." As he turned to leave, Daniels looked back one last time at the little girl, the mother, and the old dog lying happily on their porch. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Not the kind that comes from closing a case, but the kind that comes from knowing something broken had finally been healed. That night, as the city lights flickered on, Daniels sat alone in his truck, listening to the hum of the radio. The announcer's voice mentioned a story about the 3-year-old who spoke to a police dog in court. He smiled faintly. It had become more than a story. It was a legend now. And somewhere in a quiet house, a little girl whispered a bedtime prayer beside her furry friend. "Thank you, God, for my doggie. And for the man who made the bad man go away." Rex huffed softly, curling at her side. And for the first time in a long, long while, the night felt safe. A year had passed since the trial. The town had moved on, but the story of what happened in that courtroom still lived in every heart that had witnessed it. It was retold in schools, in police academies, in news reports, a story about a little girl, a loyal police dog, and a truth so pure that it brought hardened adults to tears. For Claire and Ella, life had finally found its quiet rhythm again. The nightmares were gone now, replaced by bedtime stories, piano lessons, and early morning walks with Rex. The dog, though older and slower, still carried himself with the same quiet pride, the same noble calm that had once silenced a courtroom. Everywhere they went, people recognized them. Some stopped to say hello, others simply smiled, but all of them carried the same look in their eyes, respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, Claire stood outside a community center, watching Ella chase fallen leaves across the grass. Inside the building, a banner hung over the doorway, "Courage through kindness, an evening of hope." It was a charity event, organized by a victims advocacy foundation inspired by Ella's story. Claire had been invited to speak, not as a victim, but as a voice of survival. As she walked up to the podium, the room fell silent. Cameras rolled, but she didn't feel the pressure. She looked out at the faces, mothers, fathers, police officers, teachers, and then she began. "A year ago," she said softly, "my world fell apart. I thought I'd lost everything. But then something extraordinary happened, something that reminded me that courage can come from the smallest of voices." She paused, glancing toward the corner of the stage where Ella sat with Rex, her tiny hand resting on his fur. "My daughter spoke when no one else could," Claire continued. "And that moment didn't just change our lives. It reminded everyone that truth doesn't need strength. It just needs a heart willing to speak." The audience sat spellbound. Many wiped away tears. And when she finished, the applause was long, rising, and thunderous. Afterward, a man approached her, tall, gray-haired, his police badge glinting under the lights. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, "I run a training program for first responders. We'd like to use your story, and your daughter's courage, to teach others how to work with child witnesses." Claire blinked, overwhelmed. "You want to teach it?" He nodded. "The way that officer trusted your daughter, the way that dog comforted her. It changed how we see trauma. It's not just evidence and logic, it's humanity." Claire smiled, tears welling. "She'll be happy to help." A week later, at the police academy, Officer Daniels stood at the front of a packed classroom, Rex lying beside him. A large screen behind him displayed a simple slide. Case study, the Matthews testimony. The cadets sat in silence as Daniels spoke. "I've seen hardened men crumble under pressure, but I've never seen courage like that child's. She didn't need to be coached or protected from the truth. She just needed to be heard." He paused, scratching Rex's ear. "And she trusted this dog more than she trusted the world. That's when I learned, sometimes justice needs a soft place to start from." The class listened, hanging on every word. When he finished, one young recruit raised his hand. "Sir, what happened to the girl?" Daniels smiled. "She's doing great. Lives with her mom and that furball there. And she's the reason I still believe this job matters." Winter came, blanketing the town in snow. Ella was 4 now, taller, talkative, full of mischief. She loved sledding down the small hill behind their house, Rex trotting behind her like a guardian angel with paws. Sometimes she'd talk to him as if he could answer. "You were a police dog once," she'd say proudly, "but now you're my hero dog." Rex would tilt his head, tail wagging slowly, as if to say, "I always was." Claire often watched from the kitchen window, coffee in hand, her heart full. The pain of the past would always be there, a faint scar, but it no longer defined them. Instead, their days were filled with ordinary magic, pancakes on Sundays, bedtime songs, laughter echoing down the hall. That spring, something remarkable happened. A national television network reached out to Claire. They wanted to feature their story in a documentary called Voices of the Innocent. It would highlight children whose courage had changed lives. At first, Claire hesitated. She wanted privacy for Ella, but when she asked her daughter how she felt, Ella's answer was simple. "Maybe other kids won't be scared to talk if they see me talk." That settled it. Filming began a few weeks later. Cameras captured the small home filled with love, the framed certificate of courage on the wall, and Rex lying lazily in the sun. They interviewed Officer Daniels, too, who spoke softly about faith, trust, and the quiet bond between a child and a dog. When the documentary aired, it spread like wildfire. People across the country, even around the world, wrote letters and emails, sharing how Ella's story had touched them. Some were survivors. Some were parents. Others were police officers who vowed to handle child witnesses differently from now on. And through it all, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a message. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Daniels visited the Matthews home again. He was retired now, the lines on his face deeper, but his spirit just as steady. Rex ran to greet him, tail wagging. "Still got it, old boy," Daniels laughed, bending to scratch behind his ears. Claire stepped onto the porch, smiling warmly. "You just missed breakfast." "Pancakes again." "Wouldn't miss them next time," he replied. Inside, Ella came running, holding a small medal on a ribbon. "Look, my school gave me this." Daniels knelt. "What for?" "For being brave," she said proudly. "I told my class I used to talk to a police dog in court, and they didn't believe me." Daniels chuckled. "You showed them the medal?" "Yup," she grinned. "Now they believe." He looked at her, taller, stronger, her eyes still as bright as that day in court, and his heart swelled. "You're growing up fast, kiddo. I'm going to be a police officer like you one day," she declared. "Yeah? You But my dog will wear sunglasses." Daniels laughed so hard his eyes watered. "Now that I gotta see." That night, after dinner, Claire walked Daniels to his truck. The air was cool, the sky painted with stars. "She really looks up to you," Claire said softly. "She's the brave one," he replied. "I just listened." Before leaving, he turned one last time. "You know, Claire, what happened in that courtroom? It changed more than just your lives. It changed mine too. It reminded me that sometimes the strongest testimony comes from innocence itself." She nodded. "It changed us all, didn't it?" He smiled. "Forever." Years later, when Ella was old enough to understand everything, she watched the old footage of that courtroom for the first time. She saw herself, small, scared, clutching her stuffed bunny, whispering to a big brown dog beside her. Her mother sat beside her, silent. When it ended, Ella said quietly, "That was me?" "Yes, baby," Claire said. That was you. Ella thought for a long moment. Was I really brave? Claire wrapped an arm around her. You were brave enough to change the world. Outside, Rex, older now, his muzzle gray, lay in the sunlight, eyes half closed. The sound of laughter drifted through the open window, and his tail thumped softly against the porch. He'd seen justice. He'd seen healing. And now he saw peace. In the years that followed, the story of the little girl who spoke to a police dog in court became part of the nation's collective heart. It was printed in newspapers, adapted into books, taught in schools. But for those who had lived it, for Claire, for Daniels, for Rex, it was never about fame or headlines. It was about one moment in time when truth had been carried by the purest voice imaginable. And even after Rex passed peacefully in his sleep years later, his collar, polished and shining, hung beside Ella's framed certificate of courage. A reminder that heroes come in many forms. Now grown, Ella often visited schools to talk about courage. Standing in front of young faces, she'd smile and begin. When I was 3 years old, I spoke to a police dog in court. I didn't know it then, but that day changed everything. Because sometimes, being brave doesn't mean being big. It means speaking when it matters most. And every time she said those words, someone in the room, a teacher, a parent, a police officer, wiped a tear away. Because they knew. They remembered. They believed.